The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place, filled with worlds and species who had long ago realized one important fact. Survival was a game of strength. For thousands of years, countless civilizations had risen and fallen, some falling prey to the ruthless invaders, while others fought to maintain their place in the stars. But there was one species, one force, that had risen above the rest, undefeated, unstoppable, and feared by all. This force was the Vracs. Their empire stretched across hundreds of star systems. They were ruthless conquerors, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. Every planet they encountered fell under their control, unable to defend itself against their overwhelming might. The Vracs had one simple rule: surrender or perish. No one had ever dared to challenge them, and those who tried were crushed swiftly and without mercy. For 5,000 years, they had dominated the galaxy. The other species, small and powerless in comparison, had learned to submit. It was the only way to survive. The galaxy, once a battlefield of rival factions and endless wars, had become a quiet, obedient place under the Vracs' rule. No one dared to challenge the might of the Vracs. But then, something strange happened. Something that no one, not even the Vracs, could have foreseen. Word spread, first quietly, then with growing urgency. There was a world, a small blue planet, that had resisted the Vracs. A world that had never fallen. A world that had somehow managed to escape the Vracs' all-powerful reach. A world called Earth. At first, the news was met with disbelief. The Vracs, confident in their power, dismissed it as an anomaly. One planet, out of thousands, had managed to avoid conquest. It was nothing more than a fluke, they thought. After all, Earth had no advanced technology, no powerful armies. They were a primitive species, living in relative peace with little to no military might. But as the years passed, the rumors grew louder. The Vracs began to hear whispers from their spies. Despite their great strength, they could not subdue this tiny world. Earth had remained free, and no one could explain why. The Vracs, too proud and too certain of their superiority, decided that this small planet must be dealt with. Their commanders gathered, and a decision was made. The time had come to finally bring Earth under their rule. It would be like every other conquest before it. Earth would bow to their might, and they would move on to the next world, continuing their endless campaign of domination. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have anticipated, was that Earth wasn't like the other planets they had conquered. Humanity, though small in number and technology, had something the Vracs had never encountered before, something they would soon learn to fear. As the first Vracs ships descended from the skies, prepared to unleash their overwhelming force, they were met with an unexpected sight. The Earth's skies, once peaceful and serene, were now filled with signs of life, signs of preparation. The Vracs were not the only ones watching. Earth's governments, once disorganized and scattered, had united in a way they never had before. The people of Earth had come together, not just in fear, but in defiance. It was the first hint of what was to come, a sign that humanity was not ready to give up their world without a fight. The Vracs, expecting an easy victory, suddenly found themselves on the edge of a battlefield they never anticipated. Earth had been preparing for years, though in secrecy. Humans had been working together in silence, developing new technologies, new strategies, and new ways to fight back. They had studied the invaders, analyzed their every move, and learned from the mistakes of others. They knew the Vracs' tactics, their weaknesses, and their strengths, and now they were ready to face them. As the Vracs landed, they began to deploy their vast forces. The ground shook as their massive war machines set foot on Earth's surface. They advanced quickly, their ships darkening the skies, blocking out the sun as they prepared to launch their devastating assault. The Vracs' commanders ordered their troops to begin their invasion, expecting Earth to crumble beneath their overwhelming force. But Earth did not fall, not even close. The moment the first Vracs soldiers set foot on Earth, they were met with an unexpected surprise. The ground beneath their feet trembled with power as Earth's defenders struck. The Vraks had believed they were invincible, but humanity had prepared for this moment, and they weren't about to give up without a fight. This was the beginning of something the Vraks never expected. Earth was more than just a planet of primitive creatures. It was a world of people who had the will to fight, the strength to endure, and the cunning to survive. The Vraks had underestimated them, and that mistake would cost them dearly. In the midst of the battle, as explosions filled the sky and the ground erupted with gunfire, the Vraks began to realize the truth. Earth was different. Earth was not going to fall like all the other worlds they had conquered. Humanity had one thing the Vraks could never have predicted. Humanity was not afraid. And as the battle raged on, one thing became clear to the invaders. They had underestimated humanity, and that mistake would change the course of the galaxy forever. The Vraks were not accustomed to resistance. For millennia, they had swept through the galaxy, conquering planet after planet, leaving only ashes in their wake. They had learned the art of war through sheer power and overwhelming force. Their fleets were vast, their weapons deadly, and their technology far beyond anything any other species had ever dreamed of. But they were facing something they had never encountered before, something they couldn't understand. As the first wave of Vraks soldiers stormed Earth's surface, they expected to find easy prey. The world's cities, while vast and impressive, seemed fragile in comparison to the Vraks' towering war machines. Earth's military forces, though numerous, seemed primitive when pitted against the invaders' advanced weaponry. But what the Vraks had failed to realize was the most important thing. Humans had something they didn't: resilience. In the early stages of the invasion, chaos reigned. The streets of major cities became battlegrounds as the Vraks advanced through the countryside, leveling everything in their path. However, something unexpected happened. Instead of crumbling, humanity fought back fiercely. Earth's military forces, though not technologically advanced in comparison to the Vraks, were relentless. Every bomb, every missile fired, every bullet shot from the soldiers' guns was a statement. Earth was not going to fall without a fight. It was in these moments that the true power of humanity revealed itself. Humans, when backed into a corner, did not cower. They did not run. They adapted. They fought. They learned. While the Vraks were slow to adapt to Earth's terrain, humans were quick. They had studied the alien invaders long before the first ships had landed. Governments, once divided and distrustful of each other, had come together to form a unified defense. Earth's leaders knew that their best chance at survival lay in a coordinated effort, and that was exactly what they did. From the largest armies to the smallest resistance groups, every human on Earth had one goal in mind: to protect their world. In the shadows of the cities, rebel groups began to form. Ordinary citizens who once lived peaceful lives now found themselves fighting to protect their homes. Some had no formal training, but their hearts were filled with a fierce determination. Others, veterans of past wars, took up arms again, guiding the new generation in combat. They all fought as one, united by their love for their planet and their desire to keep it free. As the battle raged on, humanity began to show its true strength. They fought not only with weapons, but with their minds. Earth's scientists, engineers, and inventors began to work tirelessly, creating new weapons and technology that would give humanity an edge. With limited resources, they quickly turned the tide in key locations. What the Vraks had not counted on was Earth's ingenuity. Humans could take whatever tools they had at their disposal and turn them into weapons of war. The first major victory came at a small, seemingly insignificant city, where humans launched a surprise counteroffensive against a Vraks command base. The battle was hard-fought, but Earth's forces, using clever tactics and ambushes, managed to cripple the Vraks' supply lines. For the first time, the invaders began to feel the pressure. Back at their command ships, the Vraks were growing frustrated. The Earthlings, whom they had once dismissed as weak, were now proving to be far more resourceful than they could have imagined. They had underestimated humanity's will to fight. Reports of Earth's victories were coming in from all over the world, and the Vrax's commanders began to worry. How could it be? How were these primitive creatures able to fight back so effectively? They were supposed to be nothing more than insects to crush underfoot. Yet, time and time again, Earth's defenders had pushed back the Vrax. One particular group of human soldiers, known as the Ghost Division, had gained notoriety for their stealth operations. Using guerrilla tactics, they infiltrated the heart of Vrax's strongholds, sabotaging their ships and disabling their weapons. With every successful mission, the humans gained confidence. They were no longer fighting just for survival. They were fighting for victory. But the Vrax were not blind to these developments. As they struggled to contain the human resistance, they began to adapt. New weapons and strategies were deployed, and their commanders ordered more drastic measures. If humanity wanted a fight, the Vrax were prepared to give them one. Meanwhile, the citizens of Earth, once scattered and disorganized, now stood united. They knew the truth. The Vrax would not stop until Earth was completely destroyed. The only way to survive was to keep fighting, to keep adapting. Every victory, no matter how small, gave them hope. And hope, as humanity knew well, was a weapon more powerful than any laser or bomb. As the battle continued, Earth's forces began to push back, gaining ground where they had once been losing. But the Vrax were relentless, and the war was far from over. The question was no longer whether humanity could survive the invasion, but whether they could win. The fight for Earth had just begun, and the Vrax, though powerful, were about to learn a lesson they had never expected, that the true strength of humanity lay not in their weapons, but in their hearts and minds. The Vrax were now fully aware that Earth was not going to be an easy target. Their invasion had turned from a conquest to a grueling war, one they had not prepared for. They had expected to crush the humans underfoot, but instead, they were facing an unexpected challenge. Humanity's resilience was unmatched, and it was beginning to show. The battlefronts across Earth were chaotic. In every major city, human resistance forces were springing up, using unconventional tactics to strike back. The Vrax, though technologically superior, were struggling to cope with the adaptability of their foes. Their advanced ships were being sabotaged, their communications were being jammed, and their soldiers were constantly ambushed in the dense forests and urban landscapes of Earth. In the heart of one of Earth's largest cities, a critical moment was unfolding. General Rebecca Jansen, a brilliant military strategist, was leading an operation that could potentially turn the tide of the war. She had spent weeks planning a counterattack that would strike a massive blow to the Vrax forces. With a small but well-trained division of soldiers, Rebecca aimed to infiltrate a key Vrax command center hidden deep in the mountains. The mission was dangerous, and the odds were stacked against them. But Rebecca knew something the Vrax did not. Earth's survival depended on their ability to strike when their enemies were most vulnerable. They had to show the Vrax that Earth was not a world to be taken lightly. Under the cover of night, the human forces began their operation. They moved swiftly through the dense forests, using the terrain to their advantage. The Vrax, unaware of the human presence, were caught off guard as Rebecca's team infiltrated their heavily guarded base. The humans, though outnumbered, moved like shadows, striking quickly and silently. They sabotaged key systems, disabled weaponry, and planted explosives throughout the facility. By the time the Vrax realized what was happening, it was too late. The humans had already accomplished their mission, and the Vrax base was in ruins. The explosion that followed sent shockwaves through the enemy forces. The message was clear. Humanity was not to be underestimated. Back at their command ships, the Vrax leaders were furious. They had thought they had Earth on the brink of collapse, but this new human tactic had left them reeling. Their strategy of overwhelming force was no longer enough. Earth's resistance was more than just a nuisance. It was a full-scale rebellion. Meanwhile, Earth's forces were growing stronger. What started as small, isolated groups of resistance fighters had now evolved into a unified global effort. Nations that had once been divided by borders and conflicts were now working together, sharing resources, technology, and intelligence. The world had become one in the face of this unprecedented threat. Humanity had also discovered something that the Vraxed had not anticipated. They were not alone in the fight. As the war continued, other alien species, who had once been oppressed by the Vrax, began to join forces with humanity. These species, each with their own unique abilities, added an unexpected advantage to Earth's forces. One such species was the Hiraki, a race of beings with the ability to manipulate energy fields. The Vrax had enslaved them for centuries, but now, the Hiraki were using their powers to help Earth's soldiers. Their abilities allowed them to disrupt the Vrax's advanced weaponry, rendering the alien ships vulnerable to attack. With the help of their new allies, humanity was gaining ground. Despite their newfound allies and successes, the battle was far from over. The Vrax still had overwhelming numbers, and they were not going to give up easily. They began to change their tactics, launching more aggressive attacks and using more devastating weaponry. But each time they thought they had the upper hand, humanity would find a way to fight back. It became clear that this war would not be won with brute force alone. The Vrax had the power, but humans had something far more dangerous: intelligence, innovation, and determination. The Vrax had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to think, and to fight back. Now, as the battle raged on, the true strength of Earth's defenders was beginning to shine through. On the front lines, soldiers and civilians alike were learning to work together. They were sharing knowledge, strategies, and hope. What had started as a desperate fight for survival was now becoming a determined effort to reclaim their planet and push the Vrax off their land. The humans were no longer just surviving. They were thriving in the face of adversity. As the Vrax began to regroup and launch their next offensive, they knew they were facing a different kind of enemy. Humanity had proven that they could withstand the worst. And as long as there was a single human left to fight, the Vrax would never conquer Earth. The tide of war was shifting, and the Vrax were starting to realize that they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated humanity. And now, humanity was ready to prove to the galaxy that Earth would not fall. Not today. Not ever. The success of Earth's resistance had sent shockwaves through the Vrax leadership. They had never expected to be outsmarted by such a primitive species. For centuries, they had ruled with unchecked power, and humanity's defiance was nothing short of a humiliation. The Vrax had underestimated Earth, and now they were determined to correct their mistake, no matter the cost. On their command ships, the Vrax leaders gathered to plan their next move. Their forces, although powerful, had suffered significant losses in the wake of the recent attacks. The sabotage of their key military bases and the damage inflicted on their supply lines were significant setbacks. For the first time in centuries, the Vrax found themselves in a situation where their victory was not assured. In their war rooms, the Vrax commanders furiously debated. One suggested a direct, all-out assault, hoping to crush humanity with sheer force. Another, more cautious, suggested that the humans had something special, something that made them different from all the other species they had conquered. They had resilience, creativity, and a willingness to adapt. The Vrax had never encountered an enemy so determined to fight back. Despite the tension and uncertainty, the Vrax leadership agreed on one thing. They needed to break Earth's spirit. They would strike fear into humanity's heart and show them the true cost of resistance. Meanwhile, on Earth, General Rebecca Jansen and her team were preparing for the next phase of their mission. The victory against the Vrax base had been significant, but they knew the Vrax wouldn't give up easily. Humanity had earned their first true victory, but the war was far from over. Rebecca had learned from the Vrax's previous mistakes, and now she was strategizing their next move. The Vrax might have advanced weaponry, but the humans had something the Vrax couldn't easily replicate: resourcefulness. Rebecca and her team had gathered intelligence from various corners of Earth. They knew the Vrax would strike again, but they were unsure when and where. They had to stay one step ahead. The Vraks may have been technologically superior, but humanity had a unique advantage: the will to win, the ability to adapt, and the capability to unite when it mattered most. The Vraks, however, were not blind to humanity's resolve. They had already begun their next major offensive, Operation Scorched Earth. This would be their most brutal campaign yet, designed to cripple Earth's infrastructure and leave humanity without the resources to fight back. It was a move calculated to break Earth's resolve and force humanity into submission. The Vraks would no longer rely on mere numbers or strength. They would use fear, pain, and terror to achieve their goals. The first strike came quickly. Massive Vraks warships appeared in Earth's orbit, unleashing their destructive power on major cities. In an instant, the world's skyline was ablaze, and millions of people were forced to flee. The Vraks had come with fire and fury, and they seemed unstoppable. The humans, however, fought back with everything they had. From the ruins of their cities, pockets of resistance rose once again. Humanity had learned quickly. This time, the fight wouldn't be about traditional military strategy. The humans would fight using guerrilla tactics, attacking the Vraks where they least expected it. They knew the Vraks could overwhelm them with firepower, but they would never be able to match humanity's ingenuity. In the midst of the chaos, General Rebecca received a transmission. The Hiraki, the alien race that had helped them in the past, had discovered something crucial. The Vraks' command ships were vulnerable to a particular type of energy attack. It was a weakness that, if exploited, could turn the tide of the war in humanity's favor. The Vraks were aware of their own vulnerability, but they hadn't considered that humanity would have the knowledge and skill to exploit it. This information was a game changer. Rebecca quickly gathered her best team, including the Hiraki and other allies who had joined their cause. Together, they began planning a daring operation to take down the Vraks' command ships. The stakes were higher than ever before, but Rebecca knew this was their chance. If they could eliminate the Vraks' leadership, the rest of the enemy forces would lose their direction and resolve. As Rebecca's team began preparing for the mission, they knew they had one shot at success. The Vraks would likely counterattack with everything they had, and if they failed, Earth could be lost forever. But there was a sense of resolve among the humans that was impossible to ignore. They weren't fighting just for survival anymore. They were fighting for their future, their freedom, and the survival of their planet. As the mission approached, tension mounted. The Vraks had underestimated Earth's ability to fight back once, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. They knew what humanity was capable of now, and they were prepared for the consequences. The suspense was palpable. Every human soldier, every commander, and every ally knew what was at stake. The war had entered its most critical phase, and Earth's fate hung in the balance. The battle lines were drawn. Earth's last hope lay in a daring plan that could either bring victory or doom humanity to extinction. The Vraks, sensing the mounting pressure, fortified their command ships in preparation for the coming assault. General Rebecca Jansen, along with her team of soldiers and allies, stood at the helm of this final push. It would be the hardest fight they had ever faced, but they knew they had no choice but to strike first. If they didn't, the Vraks would crush Earth completely, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. The plan was set in motion. The fleet of human ships, alongside the Hiraki and other allies, moved stealthily toward the Vraks' command ships. Their mission was simple: disable the Vraks' leadership's ability to communicate and coordinate. If the humans could achieve this, the Vraks' forces would be thrown into disarray, giving humanity a fighting chance to reclaim Earth. Rebecca's heart raced as she watched the fleet prepare for the mission. She knew that this operation would be a one-way trip for many of her soldiers. The Vraks were ruthless, and their ships were equipped with deadly weaponry. Any misstep could mean disaster. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Rebecca could feel the resolve of her team. They had endured so much, faced so many impossible situations, but this was the final stand. Keep focused, Rebecca instructed her team. We've trained for this moment. We can do this. For Earth. For our future. The air around them was thick with tension as the fleet entered the outer edge of the Vrax stronghold. The enemy's massive warships loomed ahead, their dark, imposing forms silhouetted against the stars. But Rebecca's team wasn't afraid. They had learned to adapt, to think, and act quickly, and to fight as one. This was the moment when humanity would prove its true strength. As they closed in, the first wave of enemy fire erupted. Vrax ships unleashed torrents of deadly energy, lighting up the dark expanse of space like lightning storms. Humanity's fleet skillfully dodged and weaved, their ships equipped with advanced technology that allowed them to evade the worst of the Vrax's attack. But the damage was still significant. Several ships took hits and were forced to break off, leaving the remaining vessels to push forward. The closer they got, the more intense the fighting became. Rebecca's ship, the Vanguard, shook under the barrage of enemy fire. Sparks flew from the walls, and alarms blared, but Rebecca remained calm. Her team had trained for moments like this. They could endure this. The human spirit was unbreakable. "We're almost there," Rebecca said, her voice steady. "Prepare to make your move." As the fleet neared the Vrax command ships, the real challenge began. The human ships split into smaller groups, each targeting a different section of the Vrax fortress. The plan was to disable their communication systems, taking away their ability to coordinate their attacks. Without it, the Vrax forces would falter, unable to make strategic decisions. If the humans succeeded, the Vrax would be left scrambling, trying to hold their ground. It was a perilous task. The Vrax command ships were heavily guarded, and their defensive systems were nearly impenetrable. But humanity wasn't going to back down. They had been underestimated, laughed at, and called weak. But now, it was their turn to show the Vrax who they were dealing with. Rebecca's ship, Vanguard, led the charge. She guided her crew as they skillfully maneuvered through enemy fire, dodging beams of energy that seemed to come from all directions. They had no choice but to take risks, calculated risks that could make or break the mission. The crew worked like a well-oiled machine, following Rebecca's every command with precision and unity. At the heart of the Vrax command ship, the humans began their strike. A small infiltration team had boarded one of the enemy's auxiliary ships, sneaking through the vast fortress to plant explosives that would disable their central communication systems. As they planted the final charges, a Vrax patrol rounded the corner. A fierce firefight erupted in the halls of the ship. The humans, although outnumbered, fought with the fury of those who had nothing left to lose. They knew that the fate of Earth rested on their shoulders. Outside, the space battle raged on, the human fleet pushing forward with everything they had. The Vrax ships continued to fire, but their efforts were becoming disorganized. The communications blackout had begun. As the last charge went off, the Vrax command ship shuddered, its systems faltering. The humans had succeeded, but the Vrax weren't going down without a fight. "All ships, fall back," Rebecca ordered. "We've done it. Now we just need to make it out alive." With their objective complete, the humans pulled back, but the Vrax weren't finished. They retaliated with everything they had. The human fleet began to retreat, but they had to fight their way out, pushing past the Vrax's last-ditch efforts to destroy them. The space around them was filled with chaos. Explosions, gunfire, and the deafening sound of ships colliding. Rebecca's heart pounded as her crew fought to keep the Vanguard intact. The retreat wasn't easy, and many ships were lost in the process. But humanity had achieved the impossible. They had struck at the heart of the Vrax's power. As the battle raged on, one thing was clear. The war had entered a new phase. The Vrax may have been powerful, but humanity had just proven that they were not so easily crushed. They had defied the odds, struck fear into the Vrax, and shown the galaxy what they were capable of. The Vrax would never look at Earth the same way again. The humans had won this battle. But the war was far from over. The Vrax would strike back, and the next move would be just as critical. Earth's survival still hung in the balance, and the fight for freedom had only just begun. After their successful strike against the Vrak's command ships, the humans had one small victory to celebrate. But the war was far from over. The Vraks, though momentarily thrown into disarray, quickly regrouped. They were relentless, and their thirst for domination was far from quenched. They would stop at nothing to crush humanity once and for all. But the humans weren't giving up. They had proven they could strike back and survive against the odds. And now, they were ready to do it again. The first signs of the Vrak's counterattack came quickly. New Vrak's warships appeared in the skies above Earth, larger and more terrifying than any the humans had encountered before. The Vraks had clearly been preparing for this moment, knowing that Earth's resistance would never go down without a fight. They'd brought everything they had, and the once confident humans now found themselves facing their greatest challenge yet. General Rebecca Jansen stood at the command center, her eyes fixed on the screens in front of her. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. They had just delivered a crippling blow to the Vraks, but this was their retaliation. This time, there was no room for mistakes. All ships, prepare for a full-scale battle, she ordered, her voice steady despite the pressure. We know what they can do, but we also know how to fight. Stay sharp. The humans weren't alone in this fight. Their allies, the Hiraki and other resistance groups from across the galaxy, stood by their side. Together, they formed a makeshift fleet that was ready to face the Vraks head-on. But even with all their allies, they knew it would be a battle like no other. As the Vrak's fleet descended on Earth, the humans braced themselves for the onslaught. Massive warships loomed overhead, blocking out the sun, their weapons primed and ready to fire. The air crackled with tension, and the sky seemed to tremble beneath the weight of their power. The Earth was under attack, and this time, the humans had no illusions about the scale of the fight. Brace for impact, Rebecca ordered as the first wave of enemy fire rained down upon them. Energy beams streaked across the sky, crashing into the Earth's defenses and causing massive explosions. The ground shook as cities were torn apart, and the atmosphere grew heavy with the sound of destruction. But the humans were ready. They had trained for this moment, prepared for the worst. Earth's defenses, though not perfect, were stronger than ever before. Anti-aircraft guns blazed, and human warships intercepted enemy fire, dodging and counterattacking with precision. The human fleet was smaller, but it was swift, maneuvering with agility that the Vrak's ships could not match. All units, focus on the Vrak's flagship, Rebecca shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. The flagship was the heart of the Vrak's fleet, and if they could disable it, they might just have a chance to win. The humans launched their assault, fighters darting in and out of the Vrak's ships, firing missiles and energy blasts. It was a desperate, high-speed battle. The skies above Earth were alive with explosions and bright flashes of light as the two fleets clashed in an all-out war for survival. Despite the overwhelming odds, the humans fought with everything they had. But the Vraks were no slouches, and their retaliation was swift and brutal. They unleashed devastating waves of fire, decimating entire sections of Earth's defenses and tearing apart ships in seconds. One by one, human ships were struck down, and the cost of the battle began to show. The humans were losing ground, but they weren't retreating. In the midst of the chaos, Rebecca's ship, Vanguard, was hit. The force of the explosion threw the ship into a spiral, but the crew managed to regain control. They were battered, but not broken. As they adjusted their course, Rebecca's eyes burned with determination. "We will not fall back," she said through gritted teeth. "We fight until the end." But the Vraks were relentless. Their attacks didn't stop. Every time the humans pushed forward, the Vraks responded with even greater force. The battle was now a race against time. Could humanity hold out long enough to break the Vraks' hold over Earth? Despite the brutal counterattack, the humans began to notice a shift in the Vraks' tactics. Their flagship, though still intact, was faltering. The humans' efforts had taken their toll, and the once confident wracks were beginning to show signs of weakness. The communication systems aboard their flagship were in disarray, and the coordinated attacks were becoming less effective. It was clear that the wracks had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt and fight back. "Focus on the flagship," Rebecca ordered again. "We can still do this. For Earth. For our future." The human fleet pressed on, determined to finish what they had started. One by one, the wracks' ships were destroyed, their defenses torn apart by the relentless human assault. And as the flagship's shields began to weaken, Rebecca saw the opening she had been waiting for. "Prepare for the final strike," she said, her voice low but filled with certainty. "This is it." The human fleet launched one last, coordinated attack. With everything they had left, they targeted the wrack's flagship, striking it with powerful energy blasts and missiles that tore through its defenses. The flagship shuddered, its systems failing as the final blow hit its heart. The flagship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, sending shockwaves through space. The remaining wrack's ships scattered, their leadership gone, their forces in disarray. Earth had won, but at a great cost. As the dust settled and the last echoes of battle faded away, Rebecca stood on the bridge of Vanguard, staring out into the wreckage of the wrack's fleet. They had done it. They had beaten back the wracks. But this victory had come with a heavy price. The battle was over for now. Earth had held strong. But the war was far from finished. The wracks would return. But humanity had shown them one thing: Earth could not be conquered. No matter how many times the galaxy tried to destroy them, humanity would always find a way to fight back. The battle was over, but the war was far from finished. As the dust settled over Earth's skies, there was a moment of silence. The devastation left behind was immense. Cities lay in ruins, and the Earth had been scared by the fierce conflict. But against all odds, humanity had held its ground. The wracks had failed to conquer the one planet they thought would fall like all the others. Earth, against everything the galaxy had thrown at it, had stood firm. General Rebecca Jansen stood in the war room, her eyes scanning the holographic map of Earth's defense grid. The fight had been long, and the price had been steep. Countless lives had been lost, both human and allied. Yet, as she looked out at the stars beyond, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They had done the impossible. "Earth is still standing," she said softly, almost to herself. The room was quiet, the weight of victory still sinking in. "Not just standing," Captain Carlos Rodriguez replied from across the room. "We've shown the galaxy that we won't bow down. We're not just survivors. We're conquerors." Rebecca nodded, the harsh truth of his words hitting her. Humanity had defeated an entire galaxy-spanning empire. The wracks had underestimated them, just as so many others before had. And yet, this victory wasn't just about the battle itself. It was about Earth's place in the universe. They had won, but the wracks had not been the only threat out there. The universe was vast, and many civilizations still looked down on humanity, thinking of them as nothing more than an insignificant species on a small backward planet. But after this fight, those ideas were bound to change. "Earth has sent a message," Rebecca continued, her voice firm. "We're not just a species that survives. We're a species that will fight for our future, for our freedom." Her words rang through the room, but it wasn't just about Earth's survival anymore. It was about the legacy they would leave for future generations. The battle had been won, but the scars of war would remain. Yet within those scars, humanity would rebuild, stronger than ever before. Outside the war room, the sounds of reconstruction began to fill the air. The surviving civilians, many of whom had witnessed the destruction firsthand, were beginning the hard work of rebuilding their cities, their homes, and their lives. They were determined to restore Earth to its former glory, but they also knew that this would never be the same world it had been before. They had changed. They had evolved. The wracks may have been defeated for now, but the war was not over. The galaxy was vast, and many species had watched the events unfold with both fear and respect. The news would travel far beyond the stars. It would be a message to every race that had ever thought humanity weak, vulnerable, or insignificant. Across the galaxy, new alliances were beginning to form. The humans had shown that they could be more than just pawns in a larger cosmic game. They were capable of standing up to the mightiest empires, of winning against all odds. And soon, they would have allies, many of whom had once watched from the sidelines, unsure of which side to support. But not all reactions to Earth's victory were positive. Some races viewed the humans' rise with suspicion. They had defeated a powerful enemy, yes, but many feared what would come next. With Earth's newfound strength and resilience, many saw them as a potential threat, not just a partner. Would humanity become another power-hungry empire, or would they stand as protectors of the weak, as they had so often promised? Back on Earth, Rebecca stood before a hologram, showing the aftermath of the battle. The damage was overwhelming. The war had cost them dearly, but the planet's recovery had already begun. But now, as the humans prepared for whatever came next, they knew they had one advantage no one else had: the will to survive. The universe had its chance, Rebecca said, staring at the stars. And they learned what happens when you mess with Earth. We don't fall. We rise. Across the planet, a collective sense of pride swelled in the hearts of every human alive. They had been tested, and they had passed. But there was a new truth now. Earth was no longer just a planet in the farthest corner of the galaxy. Earth was a force to be reckoned with, and no one, not even the mightiest empire, would ever forget the lesson they had learned today. Humanity was not just here to survive. They were here to shape the future, and as long as they had breath in their lungs and strength in their hearts, they would stand firm.